Amid the flames, a young woman saved the Duke, but when he awoke, he no longer knew who he was. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The winter ball broke on a single breath. It was a violin note that did not finish. It was a cough under silk. It was a hush that felt like a hand. Smoke pressed from the upper gallery before anyone dared say the word. Guests looked first to one another, as if a face might tell them it was a jest. Then the doors to the west corridor exhaled grey. The smell of resin and old wood turned the air sharp. A footman dropped a tray. Glass chimed on marble. The orchestra stopped without a cue. Lucia had been carrying a basket of folded napery for the midnight table. She had counted the steps along the servants' passage, as she always did, the way one counts stitches. She knew the hinge that stuck on the second door. She knew the draught that kissed her ankle when the kitchen fire drew too strong. She knew how to vanish when a noble turned a corner. She did not know how to ignore the sound of a woman's breath catching and then breaking. She moved before her name could hold her in place. The basket slid to the floor. Linen spilled like pale fish from a net. She ran toward the smoke. It pulled at her eyes. It made the walls ripple. She wrapped one of the fallen napkins around her mouth and stepped into a world that had shrunk to a corridor and a choice. The gallery's tapestries were old hunters and old stags. They were easy to love in the morning and cruel at night. Now they held embers like stars trapped in linen. Wooden beams complained. A door stood ajar. The room beyond had been a place for private music. Tonight it was full of a sound that did not belong to instruments. It was coughing, wet and stubborn, human. Lucia crouched low and crossed the threshold. Heat pushed at her cheeks. Her hair crackled near her ears. The floor had taken in the fire's breath and thrown it back. She forced her eyes to see through the moving air. There, against the wainscot. A man in a dark coat collapsed sideways, one hand splayed on the floor, the other wrapped around something small and hard. His face was ashen under a layer of soot. His lips were parted. His shirt collar had been loosened, perhaps by his own fingers, perhaps by none. "Sir," she said. The word was ridiculous in this heat. She reached him anyway. She lifted his head. His hair was damp with sweat. His breath answered her ear. He tried to cough and failed. She took his arm and pulled it over her shoulder. His weight surprised her and did not. She worked in the laundry. She lifted wet sheets every day. A man was only a different shape of burden. Her palms met the ruff of his coat. She felt the sting at once. The skin at the base of her fingers screamed. She gritted her teeth and stood. "Sir," she said again, not because he could obey, but because it steadied her. "We go. Now." He made a sound that might have been agreement or pain. She leaned forward, and he slid against her. His slack hand scraped the floor. The small metal thing in his other hand knocked against her wrist bone. It was hot. It was stubborn. He would not let it go even in half-consciousness. She did not try to take it. The smoke took enough from him tonight. The corridor back seemed twice as long as it had been an hour ago. Doors breathed out smoke, then pulled it back like nervous animals. A hanging map of the duchy curled, its edges black as a winter loaf. Lucia kept her head down. The napkin over her mouth was a mercy only for the mind. Her eyes ran. She counted the steps by feel. She found the hinge that stuck with her hip and forced it. The man's knees dragged. His shoes rasped on the floor. Her skirt caught on a splinter, and she tore it free. At the turn, two guards burst through from the courtyard side, faces red, eyes wide. Their hands went to the man, as if the world had decided its hierarchy again. One of them recognized the face that she had not, and the word that had not lived in her mouth lived in his. "The Duke," he shouted. "The Duke of Valmont." Lucia flinched at the weight of the name. The other guard reached for the man's shoulders, then for Lucia's elbow. His hand landed on her burned palm by mistake. She did not cry out. The pain flowered and closed. They lifted the Duke between them, and half-carried, half-dragged him down the corridor to the safer air. She stumbled after, useless now, light and stiff as a broom. A woman in a jeweled mask sobbed near the stair. A steward tried to count aloud, and found he had forgotten his numbers. On the terrace, cold air pinned everything down again. Breath turned to cloud. The Duke's chest rose and fell in a steadier rhythm. Someone stripped off a coat to cover him. Someone ran for a litter. Someone shouted for the infirmary. Lucia stood back. The napkin fell from her mouth. She tasted clean cold and ash. Old Porter Matteo appeared at her shoulder without a sound. His hair was white and his cap was in his hands. He looked not at the Duke, but at Lucia's hands. "Child," he said, "you'll blister by morning." "I blister now," she answered, and only then heard the tremor. "Go to Sister Caterina," he murmured. "She has tea that makes any shame leave her face, and she has eyes that do not listen to gossip." Lucia nodded because it was easier to obey Matteo than to think. She slipped along the stone wall, keeping to the shadows. She stepped over puddles that would be ice by dawn if the temper of the world held. A page ran past with a basin and did not see her. The great doors to the inner hall yawned. She entered. The infirmary was a long room made for quiet suffering. It took in the palace's fevers, its sprains, its childbirths, its last breaths. It had whitewashed walls and a row of beds like simple boats. Tonight, every bed had a story in it. Men with singed hair, women with smoke in their throats. A child who had run when told to walk and had found a banister with her forehead. The air smelled of time and something meant to be comfort. Sister Caterina came toward Lucia the way a tide comes toward shore. She was small and solid. Her hands were clean. Her eyes were the kind that could look at a person and see both the hurt and the way through it. "You should not be on your feet," she said. She took Lucia's wrists. She turned her palms up and made a soft, unmothering sound. It was not pity, it was precise concern. Of course you would run toward the heat. Of course the heat would take your hands. "There was a man," Lucia said. "He could not walk." "There are many such tonight," Sister Caterina answered. "Drink." The tea was bitter and hot. It forced Lucia's thoughts into a line. Sister Caterina wrapped her hands with strips of linen as if she were binding a book. She worked quickly. She did not ask questions that would put any servant in danger. She did not repeat anything that had been said by anyone who owned a title. She finished with a knot and then looked over Lucia's shoulder. Her gaze changed. She spoke without moving her lips. "They bring him here," she said. "The Duke." Lucia turned because to not turn would have been an act of pride she did not possess. The man from the gallery entered on a litter. His eyes were closed. His face was grey under the new attention of clean light. His lashes left streaks of soot on his cheeks. 2 guards carried him. A physician walked beside them, counting a pulse that beat whether or not anyone counted it. They set him on the long bed at the far end. It had a canopy only because the drafts liked to play games with ears. Sister Caterina left Lucia with the cooling tea and went to the Duke with the physician. She spoke low. She took a wet cloth to the forehead, as she did for every person who came through her door. Her hands did not know how to treat a titled head differently. Lucia sat. The tea asked to be sipped. She sipped. Her bandaged hands felt larger than they were. She watched the physician as one watches a play without understanding the language. He pressed. He tilted. He examined the Duke's temples. He asked the guards what they had seen. The guards answered in pieces and glances. The Duke's eyelids fluttered. They opened. He looked at the ceiling first as if it had been painted with answers. Then he looked at the faces that leaned over him and found no names inside them. He blinked. Once. Twice. He took a breath in through his nose gently. His mouth parted. "What is my name?" he asked. The question made the room tip just a little. The physician stilled. The guard with the quicker temper looked at his companion. Sister Caterina breathed out in a way that meant she would treat this as any other fever. Lucia felt the tea turn to a stone inside her. "Your Grace," the physician began, "you are at the palace infirmary. You are safe." "That was not the question," the Duke said. His voice was hoarse. It was controlled in the way a dancer holds a line, by training and not by feeling. "Forgive me, I am a poor patient. My name, Alessandre," Sister Caterina said softly, as if the syllables might decide to nest in him if addressed with courtesy. "Alessandre, Duke of Valmont." He turned the name over with his lips. It did not break. It also did not belong to him yet. He closed his eyes again, not from sleep, but from the pain of the shape of a life knocking from the outside. "Water," he said. Lucia stood before anyone else moved. She did not think. She took the cup. Her hands made her clumsy. Sister Caterina saw and nodded, and the physician stepped back the width of a choice. Lucia lifted the cup to the Duke's mouth and tipped it just enough. He swallowed. He opened his eyes and saw her for the first time, not as a blur in smoke, not as a piece of a room, but as a person. "Who are you?" he asked. She knew the answer that would do no harm. "No one," she said. He took another small drink. Water ran down his throat. His chest eased. He lifted his left hand a little, the one that had held the small object, and the little object fell to the sheet with a sound that should have been louder. It was a medallion, no larger than a thumb pad. It was dull with soot. A fine chain had snapped cleanly. An etched mark curled along its face, thin as a vine, deliberate as a signature. Lucia did not reach. She did not breathe evenly. She knew the line of that curl the way a person knows the curve of their own ear without ever seeing it. A cool circle lay against the skin at her collarbone, under the plain neck of her dress. It had been there since the convent, since she could remember fingers fixing it in place while a nun told a story she only half understood. It had the same mark. It had the same exact hand. A twin. The Duke saw that she was looking at the medallion and did not know why her face changed. He looked at it as if it were a coin. He rolled it between two fingers and frowned. He did not know the object any better than he knew his own name. "Is it yours?" he asked. She shook her head. She did not trust her throat. She set the cup down before she dropped it. Sister Katerina glanced between them, and then, with a small inclination, drew the physician and the guards aside. She gave them something to fetch. She gave Lucia a pocket of quiet in the middle of a crowded bed. "May I see your hands?" the Duke asked. She lifted them because the command had not been a command. He looked at the bandages, at the places where wet had seeped through. He tried to sit. Pain bent him. She caught his shoulder and steadied him without thinking how that would look. "You pulled me," he said. It was not a question. He looked at her hands, and then at the burnt edge of her sleeve, and then at the smear of soot on her cheek. His mouth moved in the ghost of a smile that was not about humor. "Thank you." "It was a corridor," she said. It asked to be crossed. He lifted the medallion again. He stared at it as if it had been placed in his palm by a kind god who had forgotten to include a note. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. She had two answers, the safe one and the true one. The safe one did not want to leave her lips. The true one would take her into a room she had never entered. She did what a woman in her station did when the world pressed her to the edge of her rules. She lied by telling the smallest amount of truth. "It is a medallion, Your Grace," she said. "The mark is pretty." He looked at her for a long heartbeat, as if the space between them held something that would introduce itself if given enough quiet. Then he nodded. He put the medallion back on the sheet and let his hand fall. Footsteps returned. The physician carried a small case with a brass clasp. He spoke to the Duke about a mild blow to the head, about rest, about how memory sometimes sulks and then returns when no one watches it. The guards promised to post by the door and keep the curious away. Sister Katerina checked Lucia's bandages with a deft finger and a look that said, "Later. Later we will talk carefully." There was no later that night. The palace did not sleep. It paced. Servants ran in stockings. The kitchens turned from sugar to broth. In the courtyard, a group of men argued softly about where the blaze began and what it meant that it had moved as if it wanted a particular door. Names that mattered passed from mouth to mouth. Count Rinaldi's low voice cut through, tied with ribbon. Marchioness Vittoria's calmer notes followed like a handkerchief covering a wound. Lucia was given a stool by the end of the Duke's bed and told to be the quiet that the room needed. She sat without moving and learned the sound of his breathing. It steadied. It faltered once and steadied again. Even asleep or near it, he kept his face smooth, as if his muscles had years of practice at not betraying him. It made her think of polished boots. It made her think of a boy in a convent hallway. But she scolded herself for thinking of stories. She had only her own. From the window, the city's roofs threw back a dull glow. Turin had many chimneys and many people who went to bed with their hands clean of any court's business. Lucia had been one of those people most nights. She was not tonight. She pressed her thumb to the chain at her throat under her dress. She felt the circle. She considered, for the first time in years, taking it out where anyone might see. She did not move. And then she did. She stood as if to refill a water jug and let her fingers slip under her collar. She brought the medallion into her palm and looked at it. The same curling mark, the same fineness of cut, the same weight. Her heart knew it before her eyes did. Her breath hitched. She raised it to the lamp just so far as the light would not spill into the Duke's face. The door at the far end of the infirmary opened just enough to let in a strip of corridor. A person stood in that strip. Lucia did not know who. The figure did not cough or shift or stir a draught. It simply watched. She felt it, as one feels the presence of a cat at ankle height. Sister Katerina moved to block the line of sight with her body and a tray. The figure's shoulder tilted. The door closed soundlessly. Lucia swallowed. She tucked the medallion back under her dress quickly, like someone hiding a coin from a gull. The Duke murmured and turned his head. His fingers found the medallion on the sheet as if the weight had been there in their muscles' memory. He slept. By dawn, the worst heat had been wrung from the palace. Soot lay on the balustrades like winter that had not picked a season. A fine grey powder settled on the orange peels by the kitchen door. The courtyard's flagstones shone wet and then dull. Men coughed in the corners of rooms so as not to alarm the marquises. Women dabbed at their eyes with lace that made no difference. Gossip braided itself into neat ropes and slid around banisters. Count Rinaldi stood in the small council chamber, with a tally and the expression of a man who wanted to be known as calm. He spoke of keys. He spoke of the inventory of guard rotations. He spoke of the necessity of example when a house must be reminded that the mortar is rules. He did not say the word purge, he did not need to. Marchioness Vittoria entered the infirmary with the quiet of a knife. She had slept or knew how to make her face pretend. Her gown was unrumpled. Her hair was a line. She greeted Sister Katerina with the respect owed to a woman who keeps linens clean and asks no political questions. She greeted the physician with the respect owed to a man who will say a body must rest before it can be questioned. She did not greet Lucia. She looked at her instead with an appraisal that would shame a vase. "We will be discreet," Vittoria said. Her voice was pleasant. It was a bell that called you to lessons you did not want. "The Duke's recovery is our first concern. Appearances are our second, and the efficient management of servants is tied to both." Sister Katerina inclined her head. "Of course." Vittoria let her gaze pass over the beds as if arranging a table. "Some of the help seem overtired," she said. "We will rotate. We will not have girls fainting in the infirmary, even from zeal." Lucia did not faint. She did not speak. She kept her eyes on the sheet she was smoothing by the Duke's ankle. Vittoria's attention rested on her bandaged hands and moved on with a soft shudder of disapproval. "Guards will be stationed," Vittoria said. "Curiosity is a contagion." She left. The room exhaled. Sister Katerina set down her tray and looked at Lucia's face, the way one looks at weather moving in. "Keep low," she said. "Keep quiet. And keep your courage cheap. Spend none of it on pride." Lucia nodded. She could do that. She could thread herself through hours like a needle through wool. She kept to her stool when she could. She moved when called. She read when the physician said the Duke might need a shape for his thoughts to follow. She chose simple lines about a traveller who forgot a road and found it again because a dog remembered him. The Duke listened with eyes half closed. His breath fell into the story and out again. It steadied him. It steadied her. Once, he asked her to read something else. She did not choose a tale of love. She chose a list of saints' days that made the year feel like a piece that would not without them. He smiled without the amusement that mocks a thing. It was a smile that said, "This is a place." In the late morning, old Porter Matteo appeared in the doorway with his cap clutched. A guard stepped into his path. Matteo lifted his hands. "I am here for the list of names who went out the west gate," he said. "They asked me for it in the council room." His eyes found Lucia with the swift accuracy of age. He did not speak to her. He did not need to. She felt the message leave his eyes and land in her chest. It said, "Keep your head down." It said, "There are men who will pull on the first loose thread." He left with the guard. His steps were careful, as if the floor had turned to thin ice. Lucia watched him go. She glanced at the Duke. He had slept again, surprisingly deep. His hand still rested near the medallion. Sister Katerina put a gentle palm on Lucia's shoulder. "Eat," she said, "a crust only, and drink another cup because your heart will try to run without you if you do not weigh it down a little." Lucia obeyed. She took her crust to the corner where the light did not demand her face. She chewed. The bread was stale. It made her jaw work. It made a rhythm she could obey. Outside the infirmary, the corridor carried a thread of voices. The words were not fully audible. The tone was. Count Rinaldi's measured cadence, a younger page's anxious speed, a woman's lower controlled couplet, sir. The door to the infirmary stayed open the width of a hand. The Duke woke. He turned his head and winced. He looked at Lucia eating in the corner and seemed to be relieved by the simple existence of chewing. It made the world reliable. He lifted his hand and frowned at the medallion again. "This thing," he said, "it wants to tell me a story and refuses." "Stories can be shy," Lucia said. "Sometimes they come when you stop looking." "I am not sure I know how to stop," he said, and there was humor there, a ghost of who he had been when he knew himself. Lucia almost smiled. She did not. She stood and set the crust aside. She reached to adjust the coverlet at his shoulder. She wished to fix something that did not require courage. He looked at her face as if memorizing a map. In the corridor, the voices stopped. A shadow touched the threshold. Lucia turned to carry the empty cup toward the basin. She moved into the hall, head down, as a maid does who never wants to be named. She looked up once because a change in the air made her do it. In the light beyond the lintel, Marchioness Vittoria stood with a guard. Her head was tilted at a degree that made servants straighten. She spoke low. The guard nodded. Then Vittoria lifted one gloved hand and pointed. Not toward the blackened gallery, not toward the char of the west corridor, but directly toward the infirmary door where Lucia stood. Lucia did not pretend not to see. The gesture was too precise to be for anyone else. She had been pointed at, that was enough. She lowered her eyes, dipped her head like a courtly beau she had learned from watching, and stepped back through the infirmary door as if she were merely a shadow that had mislaid its wall. Sister Caterina met her with a tray before the door closed. It was not a shield, except that it was. "Carry this to the far room," she said, crisp as a bell. "Then stay there. If anyone asks, you are counting bandages." Lucia took the tray. Her bandaged palms complained. She let them. She walked past the long beds, past the propped elbows and the whispered thanks, to the small chamber at the end where spare linens lived. The room smelled of soap more than smoke. It was a good smell. She put the tray down and pressed her bandages to her stomach for a moment and told her breath to be small. Footsteps approached. The hinge gave away the visitor as a person too careful to enter like a friend. Marchioness Vittoria filled the doorway the way a flame does not. She took no air, but the air arranged itself for her. Her face was composed. Her hair did not apologize for being perfect. "Lucia," she said, and made the syllables a test. She did not wait for permission to step inside. "I have been told you were very active last night." Lucia kept her eyes on the tray. "I did what I was told," she said. "By whom?" Vittoria asked. "The fire," Lucia said before she could reach for a safer answer. She swallowed. "By Sister Caterina," she amended. Vittoria's gloved hand drifted, as if she were smoothing a wrinkle in the air. "There is a right way to be useful," she said. "Girls who crave attention often mistake noise for service. The Duke's recovery requires quiet. It will be managed. The sight of a soot-streaked servant hovering at his bed does not soothe the court." Lucia did not argue. She nodded, small and steady. Her heart beat like a footfall at the top of stairs. Vittoria's gaze slid to Lucia's hands. The bandages were not as neat as they had been. One edge had loosened. The mark beneath was angry and new. The Marchioness did not flinch. She did not soften. "Unfortunate," she said, as if discussing a tear in lace, "and indiscreet. Curiosity is already swollen. We shall alleviate it." "I will stay out of sight," Lucia said. "Yes," Vittoria said, pleased to hear the words from any mouth but her own. "You will. Sister Caterina will assign you to storerooms, accounts, laundry, any place made of walls. No more infirmary. No more reading aloud. No more improvisations of heroism. Do not mistake a single act for a license." Lucia lowered her head. "Yes, madam." Vittoria tipped her chin as if to say, "This was easy." Then she left, and the hinge betrayed her again, a soft complaint that made Lucia's jaw unclench by one tooth width. Sister Caterina entered on the hinge's echo. She shut the door with her hip. She set an earthen pot on the shelf and spoke in a tone that did not match the room's weight, because weight can be deflected by speed. "We have a plan," she said. "The plan is, you appear to vanish. Linen counts, a list of colds among the laundresses. I will need you to carry nothing heavier than a notebook. Your hands are not for proving anything today." "She told me to stop reading to him," Lucia said. The sentence surprised her by how much it hurt. Sister Katerina's eyes softened and then sharpened. "We are not ceding all ground at once. But today, yes, we will be inconveniently obedient. The council meets. They will want a neat line of decisions that look like control. Rinaldi thrives on neat lines." There was a brisk knock, not the Marchioness, a guard's knuckles. He opened the door a whisker. He had none of Vittoria's smoothness and all of the same authority. He looked at Sister Katerina, not at Lucia. That was a mercy, perhaps accidental. "By order of the council," he said, "all non-essential staff will remain to quarters or assigned rooms until an inventory of keys and posts is completed. Names will be taken. Journeys will be logged. There will be a curfew bell at noon for servants' movement within the main wing." "Of course," Sister Katerina said. "Thank you, officer. The infirmary keeps its own time. I will send a list of the girls attached to me." He nodded and left. The hinge, faithful as ever, told the truth about the swiftness of his going. Lucia felt the word curfew land on her like a shawl that had not been offered to warm. "They will count us," she said. "They will pretend counting is the same as knowing," Sister Katerina replied. "Do not give them the satisfaction of making you afraid of numbers. They are only numbers." "I dragged him," Lucia said suddenly, the words leaping out as if through a fire of their own. "No one else saw until the hall. Now I must be hidden so no one tells that truth. It was only a corridor, it was not ambition." Sister Katerina did not hush her. She let the air take the heat and hold it. "I know what it was," she said. "Matteo knows. The Duke will know." "The Duke has no name," Lucia said, hearing the ache in it. Sister Katerina laid a cool palm against Lucia's cheek, brief and businesslike. "Names are often the least useful part of a person," she said. "Go to the ledger, make lists, show them you are paper." Lucia did. She took up a notebook and a stick of graphite and wrote down what was easy, so she could live through what was not. Sheets, 12 dozen. Towels, 9 dozen. Bandages, 12 rolls. Tea, 7 pounds. Time, low. Courage, countable, if one is mean enough to it. She made columns. She left room for more. In the great rooms beyond her small chamber, the day arranged itself into public calm. The rumors were less calm. They slipped under doors and through keyholes and around ankles. They were as quick as cats and less charming. Someone had seen a servant at the ballroom door before the blaze took its first swallow. Someone else swore a noble slipped away early, pale as wax. A printer's boy claimed to have carried a bundle of pamphlets with a satire that mocked the court's expense. He had not, but it made for good telling. A cook said the fire began in the gallery because someone had left a brazier too near a tapestry. A valet argued that nothing so random would have chosen that door. There were more arguments than bread, more certainty than sense. Count Rinaldi stood at the center of the council chamber and made order of chaos the way a river makes a path through stubborn stone. He arranged phrases. He layered them. An inventory of keys is prudent. A review of servants' movements will soothe the city. A tidy narrative will restore confidence. He did not smile. He did not need to. His satisfaction was in the stacking. Lucia heard none of his sentences with her own ears. She heard the tidings come back to her on feet. Sister Katerina passed along only the parts she needed to know. She listened while pretending to measure bandages. She learned that a betrothal for the Duke had been whispered as a possibility, a public reassurance, a plaster for a wall that might be sound if one did not look behind it. She swallowed that news without letting it cut her. It was not her business. It was also a blade that had been set on the table she worked at. In the middle of the morning, the physician came with a question about herbs. He glanced at Lucia's hands and frowned, and then asked Lucia to tell Sister Katerina that the Duke rested best when someone read. He did not say her name, he did not need to. He added almost in apology that Marchioness Vittoria had asked for quiet in the ward for the first half of the day. Of course, Lucia said. She could be quiet. She could be very good at being quiet. At the 11th hour, a footman arrived in the storeroom with a folded note. He looked like a person who had been running errands in his sleep. His jacket sat wrong on his shoulders. His hair had given up. He eyed Lucia's ledger and decided it frightened him less than the nurse. He handed the note to Lucia without a word and fled. Sister Caterina broke the seal. She read. She folded it back and put it in her pocket. "They request me in the council room to account for the infirmary's ordering of spirits and herbs," she said dry, "as if we had drunk the blaze away. You will stay here." Lucia looked up. "May I sit by the door of the infirmary to be near if he wakes? I will not read. I will be a piece of furniture." Sister Caterina weighed that. "You will sit as a chair sits," she conceded, "and if anyone speaks to you with soft cruelty, you will be neither soft nor cruel. You will be linen." Lucia went. She found a stool that had accepted more weight than most, and set it where she could see the Duke's bed without seeing his face too intimately. His shoulders under the coverlet made a shape the room had learned overnight. His breath moved the sheet in a plain, slow way. A guard stood near the door with a bored posture and sharp eyes. Another sat on a bench and drank a cup of watered wine in 6 thoughtful swallows. The hours dragged and then fell. Lucia brought her ledger to the stool and made a study of the way a column of numbers can be an anchor. Her mind chewed on smaller things, while her heart refused bigger ones. Vittoria came through once, like weather, without stopping. She took in the arrangement in a single sweep. Lucia felt the look slide over her like a scale. It left no mark. She pretended to be linen, and was, almost. At noon, the curfew bell for servants in the main wing rang as promised. The sound was polite, which made it worse. Lucia set down her graphite. She stood to stretch her back. The Duke opened his eyes and stared at the curtain as if it were a horizon. He looked at her, and did not look surprised to find her there. "You again," he said. His voice had more steadiness than the morning had given him. "I dreamed a door with a carved head on it, and woke to a curtain. It is a paltry exchange. Doors come and go," she said. "Curtains are faithful." He smiled a little, as if told a light joke in a heavy room. "What do you do when you are not dragged into fires?" he asked. "I count sheets," she said. "I listen to water. I carry trays. I step backward when someone important steps forward. Does it make you a good dancer or a good shadow?" He studied her as if the question mattered. She did not know how to answer, when kindness dressed itself as curiosity. She settled for the plain path. "A shadow," she said. "A dancer would have better shoes." He breathed a soft sound that might have been laughter, and might have been simply breath finding an easier way out. His hand drifted and found the medallion again. He had wiped it clean without noticing he had done so. The mark on it shone, plain as a signature. He stared at it a moment longer, and then set it on the coverlet, as if returning a small animal to its nest. A page hurried in with a platter of broth, as if bearing a treaty. He whispered apologies to everyone and none to Lucia. He set the bowl on the small table and rushed away, leaving behind a scent of rosemary and nerves. Sister Caterina returned at last, composed and more annoyed than tired. She gave Lucia a brief nod, the kind that says, "We have not lost ground." "Not yet." To the Duke she said, "You will have broth until you tell me you do not want broth. And then, I will tell you you do." He lifted his brows with the faintest humor. "You at least know yourself," he said. "I envy it." She tucked the coverlet with practiced hands. She saw Lucia still holding the ledger and made a small sign to stay, just for this hour. A kindness smuggled under authority. Count Rinaldi's shadow crossed the threshold and crossed back again, unwilling to commit to the smell of time. He did not come in. He did not need to. His voice floated back from the corridor, speaking to someone Lucia could not see. "We will proceed with the inventory of keys. We will have statements from porters. We will not allow gossip to choose our culprits for us, when evidence will choose them obediently." Evidence. It was a word that could be a net or a rope. Lucia thought of the way the medallion had looked in the light. She pressed her lips together and pressed her fingers to the ledger's edge. Sister Caterina sent her to the storeroom for more bandages, not because they were needed at that exact moment, but because she saw the flush on Lucia's neck and knew an errand can be a medicine. Lucia went. The corridor was cooler. The voices were louder. The household was learning to step around the guards like chairs. She passed old Porter Matteo by the stair to the west wing. He held a list in one hand and his cap in the other. He had the expression of a man trying to recite his own life in an order that will satisfy someone else. "Matteo," she said, and put plain affection into the syllables. "Child," he answered, and tipped his cap off fully for a second, which was respect and superstition both. "They want gate records. They want to know if a ghost left by the rear door last night wearing honest boots. They want numbers until numbers will be guilty." "Do you need water?" she asked. "I need more years," he said, and managed a smile. "I will settle for water." She fetched a cup from a nearby table and handed it to him. He drank and sighed in the shape of a prayer. Then a guard's hand landed lightly on his sleeve. It was not rough. It did not have to be. "Porter Matteo," the guard said. "The council requests you now." "I was on my way," Matteo said, dignity like a thread pulled straight. Lucia watched and did nothing that would place her between a porter and a guard. It would help no one. She stood with her ledger to her chest like a shield that would not be noticed because it was not a shield at all. The guard turned the gentle pressure on Matteo's arm into motion. Another guard fell in on the other side, with the courtesy of a man who has learned that being too polite is the same as being unassailable. People moved aside. The corridor narrowed even though its stones did not shift. Matteo glanced back once. He did not look at the guards. He looked at Lucia. His face rearranged itself into a useful message. He lifted his chin to make sure his voice would carry and yet not break. He did not make a speech. He made a line. "Tell him the door with the lion. He will remember." The words hung in the air like a bell that would not stop ringing. Lucia felt them travel ahead of her into the infirmary and land in the Duke's chest before she had even crossed the threshold. She did not know how such a thing could happen, only that it did. He had heard. He had been half asleep. Now he was not. She stepped inside with her ledger, as if she had only been fetching a column she had forgotten. The guard by the door straightened and then slouched again with studied ease. Sister Caterina lifted her eyes in a question that had too many answers. Lucia did not try to hand any of them back. She went to her stool. She sat. She looked at the floor. The Duke spoke first. His voice was low. It reached only the foot of his own bed and the top of Lucia's head. "The door with the lion," he said, as if the phrase itself were a key. He said it again, trying the weight of each word. "The door with the lion." Lucia kept her eyes down. It was not coyness. It was survival. "There are many carved animals in this house," she said. "Boars, hounds, birds." She heard the denial even as she said it and hated it for how small it sounded. "Not this one," he said. "This is particular. I do not know how I know. I only know." Sister Caterina drew near enough to arrange the pillows, which did not need arranging. It gave her a reason to be within reach of both their voices. "There is an old study with a lion head knocker," she said, as if naming the weather. "It belonged to the late Duke when he wished to be alone with paper. Wishing such things is a habit in that family. The room is kept more from memory than use." Lucia looked up. The word memory sat between them like a guest who had not been invited and would not leave until fed. "Is it locked?" she asked. "It has always been locked," Sister Caterina said. "But keys flow like water toward men who look as if they should have them. The porter would know." She placed a folded cloth on the table and left the rest unsaid. They all knew who held the porter's lists now. The Duke tried to sit up. He managed it with a wince and a hand to his temple. "I want to see it," he said. "If the thought is foolish, it will die of daylight. If it is not, then let us be the ones to find out." Lucia stood before caution could make her slow. It was not her place to be this kind of brave. She did not want that to be true. "I can ask a boy in the stables," she said. "Some of them are good at keys. Some of them pretend to be worse than they are. They like to help when the help looks like mischief." Sister Caterina tilted her head in consideration. "You will walk as if to fetch broth," she said. "You will return with broth, and something small and metal if the world is generous." The guard by the door pretended not to hear. He had learned the value of appearing dim. Lucia moved with a pace that was brisk and not hurried. She kept to familiar paths. She put her fear in her pocket and carried it like a coin. In the scullery she found Tommaso, who had the cleverest hands in the yard, and the kind of eyes that made elders shake their heads and forgive him anyway. He was rinsing a ladle and pretending to be at work. "Tommaso," Lucia said, offering him the smile she gave to small dogs and stubborn doors. If a person had to open a door with a lion on it, where would such a person begin? With a key, he said, and grinned. Then he saw the line of her mouth and swallowed the rest of the jest. Which lion, Lucia? The one the old Duke liked. Tommaso glanced toward the back passage. Matteo kept a ring for that floor. The council took his ring to count it, but Matteo keeps his own memory better than any brass. He was made to give them one ring. He has another. He ducked under the long table, reached up into a hollow where a loose board had always sagged, and brought down a thin loop of 3 keys. He kissed his fingers and touched the smallest key. Try the little one first. If anyone asks, you did not get these from me. I do not know you, Lucia said. It was the kindest thing she could offer him. She took the keys and a pot of broth to make her walk true. Back in the infirmary, Sister Caterina took the pot and left her palm on it long enough to feel it had been real work. She turned to the guard. We will take a short walk for the Duke's lungs, she said. The physician approves such things. Air and a few steps do not harm a man more than lies do. The guard hesitated, then nodded. He had orders not to move the Duke without cause. He had not yet learned how to call air a cause. The second guard, the one with the thoughtful swallows of watered wine, stood as if he had been waiting to be useful. I will accompany, he said. They moved through the corridor at a pace to satisfy 2 worries and to anger no one. The Duke leaned on Lucia lightly, like a man who did not want to insult her strength or his own. Sister Caterina walked on his other side. The guards walked ahead and behind, an honor that felt more like caution. They climbed one quiet stair and then another. The door with the lion found them before they found it. The carved head stared down as if amused to be recognized after a long season of being ignored. Its mane had been made by a hand that loved to cut wood. The keyhole sat in the mouth as if the lion were about to speak or swallow. Lucia handed the smallest key to the Duke without looking at the guards. He looked at the key as if it might speak and say, I have done this before. He slid it into the old lock. It resisted like an old knee. He turned. The tumblers sighed. The door opened on the smell of paper and cool dust. The study was not grand. It was made to be a place for thought to sit down. A table, a chair, shelves with registers asleep on them, a small hearth dark with disuse, a window that knew the courtyard without being seen by it. Lucia felt the hush as a kindness, not a threat. The Duke stepped in first. The guards hovered in the doorway with the energy of men afraid of being blamed for something they had not the power to stop. Sister Caterina moved with the right to be anywhere a person might choke on air. Lucia stood still for a beat at the threshold. Her palms throbbed with their old news. She exhaled and went in. The Duke moved his hand over the table as if his fingers could read in another language where his eyes failed. The table told him nothing. The drawer told him more. It stuck. He pulled with the patience of a man who knows how old houses argue. It gave a small complaint and then yielded. Inside, a sealed letter and a loose sheet with a drawing on it. The drawing was of the mark on the medallion. The same curve, the same stubborn elegance. Lucia made a sound she was not proud of. The room held it gently anyway. The Duke picked up the drawing. He held it beside the medallion he had brought with him, wrapped in a handkerchief in his pocket. He looked from one to the other the way one looks from a mirror to a face. He turned to Lucia. You knew this shape when you saw it, he said. Last night. Your face told me and then lied. She had learned to swallow truths until they dissolved. This one refused. She reached beneath her collar and drew out her own medallion on its worn chain. It lay in her palm like something alive. It had the same mark, the same light, the same weight that had pressed against her skin for years and made a small circle there that no one else had ever seen. My mother left it with me at the convent, she said, keeping her voice level by slicing it into pieces. They told me it was a promise. They did not say from whom. The Duke's face changed in a way that was not about surprise. It was about recognition without memory. It was about the body answering a question the mind refused to ask. You have worn this since you were a child, he said. He did not ask it. He stated it, as if he had heard the jingle of that small chain in a hallway long ago. Lucia looked at the sealed letter. The wax bore the ducal crest. The seal had not been broken. Her skin prickled. She felt disloyal to a man she had never known by even standing near the envelope. She also felt the ground shift under her as if it had decided to become a river. "Read it," Sister Katerina said, as if opening letters in a ducal study were a thing one did on Tuesdays. She had set herself between the guards and the table with polite boldness. Her body made a fence and a benediction. The Duke hesitated. He placed the letter on the table. He traced the seal with his thumb. He did not break it. Outside the study, the day continued to pretend it was ordinary. Inside, the air thickened with waiting. The guard behind them cleared his throat in a way meant to remind them of the existence of rules. "Your Grace," he said, "the council is seating for the afternoon session. They will expect to see you in your rooms." The Duke did not look away from the seal. "They expect to see a man I cannot be for them until I become him for myself," he said. He put his thumb to the wax again. He did not press. He removed his hand. He looked at Lucia. "Tell me about the convent," he said abruptly. "Tell me what you remember. Tell it like steps, so I can follow." She had not been asked for her story in that way before. She knew what to do with orders. She had less experience with invitations. She breathed. She began with the plainest things she possessed. "There was a door with flaking paint," she said. "Women with hands soft and hands rough. Hair bell that made even the goats incline to prayer. There was a girl who did not know who she had been before she knew the smell of lye and bread in the same hour. There was a winter when a carriage stopped and a gentleman came in. He gave money and instructions and did not leave his name. He spoke to the Mother Superior alone. Later the sisters told me kindness is sometimes loud and sometimes it is quiet. This was quiet." The Duke's face did something at the word carriage. It did not break. It unlocked. His mouth parted. "And a boy?" he asked more gently than anything else he had said. "Do you remember a boy?" Lucia searched. She had polished that hall in her mind many times. The memory had lost its details and kept its shape. There were boys from the village sometimes. They came for catechism and to steal apples. Once there was a boy in a coat that did not belong to that place. He stared at the medallion as if it had spoken to him. His breath shortened. It steadied again. He moved his hand toward her medallion and stopped before he touched it. The room was very small suddenly. It contained 2 medallions and a man who had forgotten his own name the night before, and a woman who had never expected to share a secret with a duke. It contained fear that felt less like doom and more like a path. Sister Katerina cleared her throat the way a mother might encourage a child to jump from a stone into a shallow stream. "Then the letter," she said. "We will all be braver once the worst of the truth is named." The Duke broke the seal. He did not yet read. He folded the paper open with the respect a person keeps for a voice long gone. The script was the kind of hand that has ruled land and people, a line taught to sit up straight. The first words were salutation and date. The second line was not to a council or a steward. It was to a son. Before he could carry on, voices sounded in the corridor. The guards in the doorway shifted their weight, which is the way careful men lift their swords without touching steel. Rinaldi's tone floated past the door, speaking to someone he considered useful. "We will make an announcement," he said. "A clear shape for the city. An engagement will steady the floorboards. A wedding always dulls a rumor." Lucia felt the word engagement land on her tongue like a piece of iron. She did not bite it. She held it there. She watched the Duke as that syllable moved through his face. He did not flinch. He did not harden. He looked tired and then deliberate, the way a man looks when he decides to carry a heavy thing for a chosen reason, instead of because someone else handed it to him. He read. His lips moved, making no sound. He read again as if his head was slow and his hands impatient. Sister Katerina softened her stance so that if he fell, she would catch him without anyone calling it presumption. Lucia stood very still. He lowered the page and his eyes were not lost now. They were wounded and lit from within. He spoke, not to the room, but to the person the letter had made him become. "If I am betrayed," he said, "trust the child who bears the sigil. She is the debt I could never pay." The words did not echo. They settled. Sister Katerina's hand found the table and rested there. Lucia went cold and warm in the same second. The Duke breathed as if his ribs had remembered an old instruction. He looked at Lucia. "This is my father's hand," he said. He wrote with this same tiny irritation at how an S likes to look like another letter. He wrote to me. He did not write to the council. He wrote to the part of me that knows a promise when it sees one. Lucia did not know what she was supposed to do with that gift. She held it in her chest and waited for it to find its own place. The guards were still in the doorway. They had heard enough to be curious and not enough to be relieved. "What else?" Sister Katerina asked gently. The question was the softest push. The Duke looked back at the page. His eyes scanned. "There are names I do not know I know," he said. "He mentions a steward who has since died. He speaks of a sum set aside for an orphan with a mark. He does not write why. He writes, 'If my house is ever forced to choose between faces and souls, reminded of the evening I took a boy to a convent and told him he must learn what debt feels like pressed into his palm.'" Lucia's breath stuttered. She saw it then. Not clearly, not like a portrait, but like a shadow with meaning. A boy kneeling by a hearth, a man with a ring bending to whisper, a little girl being told to hold a charm in her fist until it hurt enough to remember what pain could be when it belonged to someone else. It was half story and half pain. It was enough. The guard with the thoughtful eyes shifted. "Your Grace," he murmured. "We should not stay here long. It looks like concealment to those who do not know better." "We will not hide," the Duke said, and the line of his back agreed. They left the study as they had entered it, with the heir choosing not to carry their secret away too quickly. The door closed. The lion looked satisfied. Lucia let the keys lie against her palm for a moment longer, before Tommaso's hiding place took them back. The house had grown more talkative while they were gone. News travelled without shoes. Lucia and the Duke had not yet reached the bottom of the stair, when a chambermaid, cheeks flushed from her own errands, rushed past and whispered to her friend without meaning to be overheard. "They say a servant cloak was seen near the ballroom doors before the first smoke. They will hang their blame on cloth. It is cheaper than guilt." Sister Katerina's hand shot to Lucia's sleeve and pinched lightly, the way one steadies a teacup about to shatter. "Do not let loose words find you," she said under her breath. "They bite and pretend they are small." At the turn, Count Rinaldi himself came into view, flanked by lesser men whose value was in being present when he spoke. He stopped when he saw the Duke. He made a bow adjusted for injury and rank and the presence of women. His smile was polite and not warm. It was a tray one did not dare set down. "Your Grace," he said, "we were about to send for you. The city waits for our voice. Panic is a cruelty. We must not be cruel when we can be clear. The court understands your need for rest. It will understand better when we announce your intention to secure the duchy with a fitting alliance." "An alliance," the Duke repeated. His tone was even. He did not ask for details. He did not need them. Rinaldi would have them in neat lines. "A betrothal," Rinaldi said, as if choosing a softer synonym smoothed a rough thought. "Your cousin Vittoria has labored to arrange a meeting of minds. The Marchioness d'Arberg has a daughter with virtues that speak for themselves. Beauty, yes. Dignity. A family unspotted by scandal. The city will sleep." Lucia felt the world tilt in a way that had nothing to do with smoke. She stepped back without moving. She became all at once very good at being spare. Sister Katerina's fingers pressed again, and then released. The Duke nodded. It was a slow movement, with a purpose under it. "I will speak to the council," he said. "I will choose my words with the care this house deserves. But I will not make vows to steady a flaw that can be repaired with truth. We will begin with truth." Rinaldi's eyes held a warning couched as concern. "Truth does not stir a crowd as quickly as ceremony," he said. "We must be wise men as well as good." "Wisdom without goodness," Sister Katerina murmured, just loudly enough for Rinaldi to hear, "makes neat funerals." He chose not to answer her. He directed his gaze to Lucia, as one peers at a bee alighting on a dish. "And this maid," he said lightly, as if tasting a harmless curiosity, "has she been assigned by the infirmary to the Duke's convalescence?" "She is assigned to me," Sister Katerina said. "Everything that touches the Duke's health is assigned to me while he breathes under my roof." Rinaldi accepted that with a tilt of the head that meant nothing could be accepted forever. He made another bow that ended the conversation and walked away with his lesser men trailing like ribbons. The afternoon stretched, the house adjusted, the way a shirt does when someone taller puts it on. Lucia returned Tommaso's keys with a look and a nod that meant gratitude and danger both. She passed Matteo's empty stool at the porter's door. It looked like a person had been subtracted from the room, and everyone had agreed not to mention the missing number. By mutual unspoken consent, Lucia and the Duke did not return to the infirmary immediately. Sister Katerina steered them through the long gallery that remembered how to be quiet, then out into the garden. Frost traced the hedges. The gravel kept secrets. They walked slowly. The Duke kept his hand light on Lucia's arm. The colder air woke him without cruelty. He looked at the sky as if he had never seen its particular way of being ordinary. Lucia watched his profile and tried not to learn it. "So you will be asked to forget this morning," he said after a time. "You will be asked in the tone that makes forgetting sound like obedience." "I am good at obedience," Lucia said. She did not make it a joke. She made it a sorry fact. "I am learning the difference between obedience and loyalty," he said quietly. "Obedience is a habit. Loyalty is a choice." "You speak like a man with memory," she said, surprised at herself for letting the remark out of her mouth where anyone might catch it. He smiled at the hedge. "Perhaps memory was inefficient. Perhaps I am quicker without it." Lucia stopped. The path had narrowed to a place where one person must step aside for another to pass. She did not move. He did not either. The closeness was a door neither had chosen. It asked for something and did not name it. "They will say I reached too high," she whispered, and heard how easily the phrase pretended to be someone else's thought. It was her own. "Then let them look up," he answered, not moving away. He lifted his free hand as if to touch her cheek, and then did not. The restraint trembled. It settled. The air between them knew they had been brave and polite at once. Steps approached on the path. They moved apart as if they had been standing near only to discuss a frost-bitten rose. A footman, carrying a basket of covered dishes, peered at them, and then remembered to lower his eyes. He passed and left behind the smell of broth and butter. They returned to the study, when the house grew tired of choking on its own gossip. The door with the lion greeted them with the same carved patience. They entered. The letter lay where they had left it, as if it had been waiting with good manners. The Duke read it through from the beginning this time. He stopped at the line written to a son, took a breath, and kept going. He read about funds placed for a child, identified by a mark. He read about a promise made years ago in a room with too much stone in it. He read the words debt and trust and betrayal. He read the name of a steward whose ledger had always balanced, and whose quiet had purchased other men's noise. He read dates that sank into the paper like small anchors. Lucia felt something inside her cease struggling and float. She could not call it relief. It was more like a piece of a puzzle finding its neighbor. It made the picture no less complicated, but it made a piece of it less lonely. The Duke set the letter down and pressed his fingers to his eyes, as if the light had grown too bright for a moment. He did not weep. He did not clench his jaw, as men do when they wish to be thought strong. He simply breathed with a new rhythm. When he looked up, he looked at Lucia, as a person looks at a shore after a sea they had not known they were swimming. "We will take this to the council," he said. "Not for their permission, for their knowledge. They do not get to write this story without the page that matters." Lucia nodded. She did not say, "They will not be glad." She did not say, "Vittoria will smile at you until you think you imagined the teeth." She held the letter's weight as if she shared it with him. They had time to cross the study only in thought before the corridor announced another visitor, in the way old corridors do, with footfalls that answer to certain names. The step was quick and practiced. It was used to being admitted without question. It knew how to carry panic in a parcel wrapped to look like news. A page appeared in the doorway, pale and breathless, a ribbon slipping from his hair in his haste. He held a folded paper with the regent's seal bright against the grey of the day. His voice was thin and urgent and trying not to be either. "Your Grace," he said, "a writ has been issued for the maid Lucia Ferraro, by order of the regent, requiring her immediate questioning and detainment." The page's words emptied the room of air and left only choices. Lucia felt her knees remember the stone of the convent chapel. She did not kneel. She looked at the Duke. He did not look away. "Give me the writ," Alessandra said. His voice did not rise. It reached the page and took the paper from his shaking hands without a tremor. He broke the seal. He read. He let the silence after the reading be long enough to teach the room something. Sister Katerina's mouth was a thin line. The guards shifted near the door as if to remind everyone they existed, because someone else wanted them to. The page swallowed and stood as straight as a boy could in a room that had just become too full for him. "The regent's hand," Alessandro said, weighing nothing but words. By counsel's advice, the maid Lucia Ferraro to be brought and held for questioning. He folded the paper. He put it on the table beside his father's letter. Then he looked at the guard with the thoughtful eyes, the one who drank watered wine with care. You are posted to my person, not to the council's. True? The guard bowed. Yes, your grace. Then hear me plainly, Alessandro said. No hand will be laid on this maid without my order. If the regent wishes to speak with my staff, he will do so in my presence. If questions are to be asked, they will be asked where I can answer them as well. The guard inclined his head. It was relief and duty in one gesture. I understand. Lucia breathed, but it felt borrowed. Your grace, she began. He turned to her before she could finish. Lucia, he said. Just her name. He said it like a promise, and the writ lost half its teeth. Sister Caterina broke the spell with necessary work. We go to the council now, she said briskly. Before paper grows teeth again, bring the letter, bring what truth you have, leave the rest. They moved through corridors that recognized rank and did not know what to do with courage. Servants stepped aside, not because they feared the duke, but because the ribbon of the regent's seal still fluttered in imagination. Curiosity ran ahead and opened doors for them. The council chamber had remembered how to look austere overnight. Long table, high-backed chairs, men who had learned to sit as if they were also furniture. Marchioness Vittoria stood near the tall window, the light behind her making her hair a dark crown. Count Rinaldi presided, which is to say he occupied the precise spot where presiding looked good. Your grace, Rinaldi said, rising. Our concern is noted, Alessandro said mildly, and entered as if he had always meant to arrive at this exact breath. He did not sit. He placed the regent's writ on the table, then his father's letter beside it, so that one seal looked at another, and neither could claim to be fuller of authority than the other. Vittoria's gaze slid to Lucia, and then away. We will be quick, she promised, too kindly. Questions simply tidy the day. Sister Caterina moved to Lucia's shoulder and made an answer with her presence alone. Tidy would not mean cruel if she could help it. Rinaldi touched the writ's corner with one finger. A matter of procedure, he said. A servant seen in a corridor at an hour when servants ought to be elsewhere. A rumor about a cloak. We must show the city that order walks on its own legs. Order does not walk on lies, Alessandro said. He lifted his father's letter and held it without flourish. Before you ask your questions of a girl who pulled me through smoke, you will read what my father wrote to me. You will hear what is owed in this house. Then you may decide whose legs order stands on. Rinaldi did not like being told where to begin. He also loved letters more than he loved flashes of temper. He gestured for the page to carry the paper to him. He read. The room altered by a degree that only Sister Caterina's eyes noticed. Men who prided themselves on weatherwise expressions found themselves in rain without an umbrella. Vittoria's mouth did not move, but her eyelids did. That was all the admission she allowed herself in public. Rinaldi read twice, the way men do when their hearts must catch up with their judgments. He spoke at last, slower. The late Duke writes of a debt. He writes of a child marked by a sign. He writes of trust when betrayal claims the house. He writes to his son, Alessandro said. His tone was gentle, clear. Vittoria turned, soft as silk. He does not write names, she said, a reasonable thorn. He does not write that this particular maid bears any particular mark. Lucia lifted her chin. She did not step forward. She did not make a speech. She reached up, drew her medallion from beneath her dress and let the light take it. It looked like nothing to a woman who did not want to see it. To a man who had held a twin in his hand, while forgetting his own name, it looked like the shape of a promise. Rinaldi leaned forward. He did not reach, but his fingers hovered. The mark is the same. The hand is the same, he said, and his voice lost a sliver of caution. 2 medallions, Vittoria said smoothly. 2 children. The world is full of coins. The world is not full of this coin, Sister Caterina said, not raising her voice, trusting the room to hear her for once. The sisters at Santa Consolata did not hang such trinkets around the necks of girls like winter oranges. This came with a hush and a purse. Rinaldi's attention flicked to the nurse with new respect. You knew of this before, he said. I knew Lucia wore a small weight and that she never took it off. Sister Caterina said. "I knew a gentleman paid for a roof and did not leave his name. I did not ask for more. We are careful with the few mysteries we do not need to touch." Vittoria let a pause flower and then plucked it. "Even if we admit the charm's provenance," she said, "we do not answer the question of last night's movement. A witness from the scullery states that this maid lingered by the ballroom doors before the blaze." Lucia looked at her bandaged hands and felt shame try to climb her throat. She swallowed it down because it had no right to fill her mouth when truth had not yet been spoken. "I went where I was sent," she said clear. "I carried linen. I took the passage by the laundress's press because the other way was blocked by noble skirts. I reached the gallery and heard a cough. I did what a person does when another person cannot breathe. That is the story." Rinaldi asked, "Who can attest to this path?" Sister Caterina did not move. "No one who matters to a chair," she said. "A scullery boy, a footman half asleep, a woman who keeps the keys to the linen press and knows it never closes true. Or you could be content with a porter whose eyes are better than yours." "Bring Matteo," Alessandro said. A murmur ran around the table. Men enjoyed being seen to act. A page ran. Moments later, the old porter entered, cap in hand, dignity in his spine. He seemed smaller in that room. He did not let it change his height. "Matteo," Rinaldi said, remaining seated as if belief were too expensive to stand for. "Where were you when the fire began?" "At the west gate," Matteo replied, "counting those who went out as the smoke rose. A man likes to know who was left in fear and who did not leave at all." "Did you see this girl?" Rinaldi asked mildly. "I saw her after," Matteo said. "I saw her after, with her hands like meat and her eyes like a bell that had not stopped ringing, and a man with a ducal face breathing again because she is stubborn." Rinaldi frowned, not in irritation, but in thought. "And before?" "I am no ghost," Matteo said. "I cannot be at a gate and in a gallery." Vittoria offered her witness here, the scullery maid in a clean apron, cheeks pink, eyes darting. She told her story in fits. She had seen a maid by the ballroom door. She thought it was Lucia. She had not been close. She had been carrying a pail. It might have been someone else. She could not be sure. She could be useful. Rinaldi rubbed his temple. It looked like he had expected more help from her fear than she had energy to give. "You are not certain," he said. "I am certain of fear," the girl whispered. "We can all swear to that," Sister Caterina said. Alessandro lifted his hand and the room quieted without knowing why it obeyed. "I cannot name all my past," he said, "but I can name this. The woman you point to is the only reason you may dress your fear in words instead of gasping on a floor. If any must be questioned, begin with those who made the blaze walk where it wished to go, not with those who ran at it because their feet could not do otherwise." Vittoria's look did not falter. "No one here accuses your maid of malice," she said. "We accuse the knight of being a poor witness." "And I accuse procedure of being an eager scapegoat," Alessandro replied. "We will not indulge it today." He lifted his father's letter again. He did not shake it. He did not need to. "This house owes a debt to a child marked by this sigil. That child grew. She works under my roof. She saved me in a corridor while others trampled one another. She has money in a ledger she does not know, placed there by a hand that is now dust. You would make a public show of detaining such a person to reassure a city that listens to your assurance only when you sing in the right key. I will not have it." Rinaldi shifted, not to stand, but because the chair had turned uncomfortable. "Your Grace," he said, a thread of warning in the silk of respect, "the city does not learn our truths, it learns our shapes. A betrothal is a shape that calms. An order issued is a shape that says, we are not idle." "Then let us make a different shape," Alessandro said. "I will address the court. I will state the inquiry plainly. I will state that I owe my life to a maid whose name is Lucia Ferraro. I will tell them I will choose whom I trust. Begin there." Vittoria's lips curved. It was not a smile. It was an acceptance of a conversation she would now move to another room. "Of course you will speak," she said. "The whole city wishes to see your face. That face will reassure them more than any decree." Rinaldi sighed. It sounded like a man setting aside a tool he had sharpened all morning to be used later. "Very well," he said. "The writ will be held in abeyance. Questions will be asked where the answers can be heard by those who must hear them. The inquiry will focus on keys and posts." Alessandro nodded. And while you count, you will return the ring taken from the porter so he may do his work. We will not make ourselves fools by stumbling in our own halls." Matteo's chin lifted a fraction. The smallest victory sometimes tastes most clean. The council rose because it had to. Men had to be seen standing when a duke chose to stand. They bowed. They murmured. They made a river of polite exit, and in that river Vittoria drifted close to Lucia, with the effortless grace of a woman who runs two conversations in one. "So much heat over a small coin," she said softly, like a comment about weather. "Be careful, girl. Not because I am wicked, because the world is indifferent. It eats brave little things without noticing." Lucia met her eyes for the first time without looking down. "The world did not drag him out," she said. "Someone had to notice." Vittoria's lashes lowered. "And someone will always notice that you were the one who did. Hide where you can. It will be easier for both of us." She left with a scent of pepper and lemon that made Lucia irrationally hungry for a life that did not need to speak to women like that. Sister Caterina led Lucia out by a side door so she would not be tripped by congratulations that were not for her. The corridor here was quieter. The air did not have to carry so many opinions. They reached a small antechamber with a bench and a casement window. It looked out on a strip of garden where frost dawdled. "Sit," Sister Caterina said, "just for a little while. Let your heart come back to a pace a body can use." Lucia sat. She did not know what to do with her hands, now that they were not being ordered by crisis. She clasped them and unclasped them and thought of the ledger waiting for her on the stool. She thought of the Duke's father's hand. She thought of a circle on her skin that had always been a private thing and was now part of a room full of men who loved order. The door opened behind them with a soft scrape. Alessandro stepped in alone. He closed the door and leaned his back against it for a breath. He looked at Lucia and then at the window, as if needing a sky to speak to and not to. "I should say something formal," he said, a small smile that was not for display lighting the edge of his mouth. "I do not have the talent for it today." She stood because to stay seated while a duke stood felt wrong, and also because she could not bear the angle of her own neck looking up at him on this day. He gestured for her to sit again. She did not. It made them equal from the waist up, which was not true and felt necessary. He stepped closer, not too close. Close enough that she could see the soot that had not left the rim of one fingernail. He had been cleaned and dressed and presented. He was still the same man who had asked her for water and his name. "I cannot name all that the letter names," he said, "but I can say it aloud. My father placed you under the protection of this house, before the fire, before this room, before any of this. That is one truth." She nodded. Words would have broken. "Another truth," he went on, quieter. "I woke with nothing. Faces were pieces. Words were tools. Only your voice felt like a place." She shook her head. "It is not right that my voice should be a place. You have homes that are not made of girls in aprons." He smiled. Grief and joy mingled. "I have houses. I am only now learning which of them are homes." She wanted to make light of it, to protect herself with humor in small pieces, to say something about drafts and tapestries that ate dust. The words did not come. The air had turned delicate, like sugared glass. "If I am to stand in that hall and speak to them of truth," he said, "I will not pretend in private. I choose you, with memory or without it. That is not a flourish. It is a line I can walk." Her heart stuttered, and then learned a new beat. "You do not know me," she said, the honesty painful and clean. "I could be a woman who speaks softly and steals spoons. I could be stupid. I could be unkind. You could be all of those things," he said, "and I would still owe you a debt. But I have watched how your hands steady a cup. I have watched how you lower your eyes only when it spares someone's pride. I have watched how you tell the truth without wrapping it in more cloth than it needs. I know enough for a vow." She looked down at her bandages. They were not elegant. They were honest. "A vow," she repeated softly, frightened of the word and hungry for it. He did not reach for her hands without asking. He offered his, open, bare, waiting. She placed one of her bandaged palms in his and felt the strangeness of a touch that did not claim, did not assume, did not ask her to be anyone but the person breathing in that second. The pressure was light. It was enough. "They will not like it," she said, not to dissuade him, but to tell the truth out of habit. "They will live," he said. "I intend to." Sister Katerina, who had mastered the art of absence when needed, looked out the window with great interest in the frost. "You will speak plainly later," she said without turning. "Say enough, not more. Leave space for tomorrow to answer you." Lucia tried to laugh and managed a breath that could be mistaken for one. "Tomorrow," she said, "and let the word be kind for once." Alessandra released her hand with reluctance that did not try to disguise itself. He looked at her mouth and then away, gentleman and man, in an even battle in his gaze. "May I ask you for one thing?" he said. She considered saying yes before he asked and decided he deserved a prayer and not a pledge. "Ask," she said. "When the room is loud tonight," he said, "and the faces blur, will you stand where I can find you if I turn? If I cannot remember a name, will you be the place my eyes can rest?" She thought of her life up to now, a series of corners and retreats and cold wrists under hot water. She thought of the knight's corridor. She thought of the door with the lion. She thought of a little boy in a coat not meant for that hallway. She thought of the medallion pressed to her chest when the world was too wide. She nodded. "I will stand where you can find me," she said. He breathed out, as if that had settled more debt than a purse could carry. "Then I will do what needs doing," he said. "I will say what must be said." He left them there in the quiet antechamber, because even a duke must dress a sentence before it meets a crowd. Sister Katerina turned at last. She assessed Lucia the way a carpenter assesses a beam before building under it. "You will wear clean sleeves," the nurse said. "You will stand where the view is good and the danger is manageable. You will not faint. You will not shrink. You will be yourself." Lucia let a laugh come for real. "And if I cannot do all that at once?" "Choose one and do it well," Sister Katerina said. "Then choose the next." They returned to the infirmary for a time because rooms have memories, and this one had theirs. Lucia read a paragraph to the Duke, not out of story, but out of a book of public forms, the dry language a balm, because it made no claims on the heart. He listened as if he were learning a new instrument's range. Old Matteo slipped in, cap in hand, relief making him look 10 years younger. "They returned my ring," he said in a voice he kept low, as if gratitude might startle if spoken too loud. "Not because they trust me, because the Duke told them they must trust something." Lucia took his hand, the unburned one, and squeezed it. "We will trust the hinges to tell us the truth then," she said. He chuckled, pleased to have his work honored by someone who knew the sound a door makes when it lies. Afternoon softened toward evening, in that way winter days have of retreating early. The house changed clothes. Candles were coaxed into life. Footmen carried the news of where people should place their own faces. The great hall waited. Lucia found a fresh apron. She smoothed it without fuss. Sister Katerina bound her hands with cleaner linen that did not draw the eye so quickly. She braided her hair with the care of a person braiding a rope she will need later. Alessandre stood in the doorway of the infirmary, long enough to take in the sight of them, the little hospital done up like a church before a saint's day. He inclined his head to them both, an acknowledgement that did not weigh itself down with gratitude, because it did not need to prove anything. He offered his arm to Sister Katerina to lead her to the hall, not because she needed the support, but because the court needed to see him linked to the only authority more stubborn than theirs, mercy. Then he held his hand toward Lucia just for a moment, a brief, private ceremony no one else could claim to have witnessed. She placed her fingers on his sleeve for the length of 3 breaths. They were steady. The breath after, she let go. The great hall gathered them in. The dais waited. The murmurs rose and fell in tideless breaths. Lucia found a place where he had asked her to stand, halfway down the length of the room, near a pillar that would hide her if she needed hiding and show her if he needed seeing. She stood. He walked to the center, not in pomp, but with a clarity that found its own light. He stopped where echoes are born. The first words would matter. The room knew it. He knew it. Lucia, among the unseen, held still. When he spoke, he did not begin with policy. He began with a simple fact. "I owe my life," he said, "to a maid who ran toward heat. Her name is Lucia Ferraro." A visible ripple moved through the hall. It was not outrage. It was something less practiced and more honest. People adjusted how they stood. They adjusted how they saw. He went on. He spoke of inquiry. He spoke of keys. He spoke of the letter without reading it aloud. Because some things are for a son before they are for a crowd. He spoke of a house that will balance its debts. He did not promise what he could not keep. He promised only that he would not look away from what had already happened. He did not call for silence. He called for patience. When he finished, he did not lift his arms to catch applause. He did not wait for anything except his own breath to come back. He stepped down and did what he had asked of her. He turned and found her in the place she had said she would be. Their eyes met. In that small connection, the hall's size did not matter. The glances of ladies did not matter. The council's ledgers did not matter. It was two people who had chosen the same corridor out of 100, and were now ready to walk it again without smoke. Later, in the quiet that the house keeps between a speech and a meal, Lucia returned to the terrace for a moment, and let the cold take her cheeks. She pressed her medallion between two fingers, and felt the metal warm under her skin. She did not pray. She did not need to. The vow in the antechamber was a prayer answered in the asking. Behind her, steps approached at the slow pace of a man who is coming to stand beside a person, not to startle or claim or command. She did not turn at once. She knew who it was by the way the air admitted him and did not change its temperature. "We have done a great deal without rest," Alessandra said softly. "We will learn to rest," Lucia said. "Like saints who did not." He laughed, quiet in the cold. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she echoed, and the word felt like a bridge they had already begun to cross. Morning did not arrive with trumpets. It came with the ordinary clatter of pails, the cough of chimneys relearning their work, the shuffle of boots trying to be quiet. Lucia woke with a clear line in her chest that had not been there before. It was not courage exactly. It was the absence of the one fear that had ruled her choices. He had said the words, she had answered them. The rest of the world could be as loud as it liked. Sister Caterina tied fresh linen around Lucia's hands and pressed a kiss to her hair the way a woman blesses bread without ceremony. "Eat," she said. "You will need a voice that does not tremble for a day that will shake others." Lucia nodded and drank broth and counted heartbeats and did not try to imagine a future. She had learned the last 2 days that imagining took too much air from whatever was happening in front of her. A footman brought a note sealed in red that was not the regent's. The Duke's hand named the hour. The council would reconvene to place facts in a line. The great hall would open. The ledger would speak. Lucia folded the note and put it in her apron as if it were a small living thing. The palace gathered. The tables were removed. The chairs were set to face the dais. Old Porter Matteo stood at his post again, ring of keys bright against the dull of the stone, his chin raised like a man who had survived a night of having his name questioned. The guards posted themselves with less eagerness, as if the taste of yesterday's writ still sat on their tongues and made politeness easier. Alessandra entered without pause or flourish. He wore a plain dark coat and the face that had learned to be both a shield and a hand. He looked over the hall and found Lucia where she stood, as he had asked, halfway to the pillar that could hide her or show her. He did not smile. He allowed his eyes to rest, a small thank you sent across a room full of people who mistook distance for safety. Count Rinaldi called the gathering to order with his careful voice. He began to list posts, keys, watches, routes. He made the map of a night that had pretended to be chaos and had in fact been guided. When men list things that matter, the air itself becomes attentive. "We have accounted for all watch changes," Rinaldi said. "We have matched keys to doors. We are missing one ring, lion-marked for the northern run." "Not missing," Matteo said, and stepped forward into a room that did not invite him and did not know how to tell him to go back. He lifted a small, battered ring of 3 keys and held it up like a modest piece of truth, found in the hand of a boy who did not know what to do with it, returned to me at dawn by his shame. A murmur rustled. Rinaldi lifted a palm. Whose hand gave it to the boy? Matteo fixed his eye on a point just beyond Rinaldi's shoulder, the way a man looks if he wants to tell a truth without letting it stain him. "The steward to her ladyship's household," he said. The room did not need a name to turn its gaze to Vittoria. Vittoria did not flinch. She did not possess that crude grace. She straightened and let air polish her reply. "A steward's errands do not write their own virtue," she said. "He has overstepped to impress me, and I am consistent in my disappointments." Rinaldi held out a hand. Matteo crossed the floor and placed the lion-marked ring in it with a respect that belonged to the object and not the man. Rinaldi weighed it, not as an ornament, but as a lever. "This opens the northern run," he said. "This opened it on the night of the fire." A stir at the edge of the hall. A young voice asked to be heard and was startled when the space made room for it. Prince Carlo stepped forward, pale but upright, his coat too fine for his thinness, his courage too new for polish. "I was told to use the north run," he said. He did not look at anyone but the Duke. "I was told it would be easier, that I should leave early to spare myself smoke. I did. I am ashamed. I did not ask who would close the door after me." Silence. Then the hum that means human beings have been reminded they have hearts. Vittoria's face did nothing. Her mind raced behind it like horses behind a stable door. Alessandro stepped down from the dais and stood level with Carlo, as if the distance between a duke and a prince could be measured by the size of a boy's regret. "You are not to be ashamed of breathing," he said. "You are to be wise next time. Wisdom is a slow animal, it can be coaxed." Carlo swallowed. "I did not understand," he said. "You do now," Alessandro answered. He turned to the hall. "We will not make scapegoats of boys. We will not make martyrs of servants. We will conduct an inquiry that answers to truth, not to appetite." Rinaldi breathed, and the breath sounded like a man folding away a sword he had hoped to use. "The steward will answer for the keys," he said. "We will trace his orders. The court will be informed that the blaze was abetted by the misuse of access." Vittoria lifted her chin an inch, then lowered it the same inch. It was the smallest bow a woman could give to the inevitable without surrendering her spine. "I welcome clarity," she said. "I also wish the city to sleep. Let us be practical. We cannot rest on principles alone." "The city will sleep," Alessandro said. His voice was level. It carried. "It will sleep because we stop stumbling in our own halls. It will sleep because you will hear me speak plainly in this room, and I will expect you to carry those words into your houses like bread." A smile flickered at the corner of Sister Caterina's mouth. She stood near the dais, arms folded, her presence as unignorable as a brazier in winter. Rinaldi gestured toward a clerk. "Record," he said. The clerk dipped quill and made the letter of the day, a shape that would be tied with ribbon and filed. It mattered not because ribbon matters, but because words do. The business wound down. The hall did not disperse. Its attention shifted from ledger to life. Alessandra turned back to the dais and did not mount it. He remained at the level where feet scrape and skirts rustle. He looked at Lucia where she stood by the pillar, and then at the space between them, which was made of people's glances and old rules. "Come forward, Lucia," he said. Her name filled the hall without strain. It moved into ears and softened them. She stepped out because he had asked, and because her feet knew how to obey a thing that was not humiliation. She walked like a girl who had learned to carry heavy linens and was now carrying her own fate, which was lighter than bundles and heavier than shame. When she reached him, he took off his gloves. He did it slowly, finger by finger, as if removing a small armor. The gesture rippled through the room. Hands remember more than minds. Women watched and touched their own wrists without knowing why. He held the gloves together in one hand, useless as symbols now. With the other, he took Lucia's bandaged hand, the gentlest claim a person can make without shadowing another. He did not look at the watching faces while he spoke. He looked only at hers, as if she were the person he had to persuade, and the rest were witnesses by accident. "I meant to say more, and I find less is truer," he said. "I choose you. I say it in front of those who think they own my choices. I say it because I owe a debt that has nothing to do with the blaze, and everything to do with a boy who was led to a convent and told to learn what a promise weighs. If I am to be worthy of that lesson, I must begin here." Her breath left her and came back with a new name. She kept her eyes on his because there was nowhere else safe to put them. "You know what you ask," she said, trying to give him one last deniability to be noble with. "You ask for scandal, for whispers that do not tire, for rooms that close when we enter. I ask for rooms that open when we do," he said. "If they do not, we will open them." It was not poetry, it was a plan. The hall listened because plain things are easier to carry. Rinaldi cleared his throat in the small officious way of men who are about to either bless or block. He did neither. "Your Grace," he said, without looking at Vittoria for permission, "the council's concern has been order. A marriage that is not made of calculation may nevertheless be orderly if it settles the house. We cannot pretend it is prudent. We can say it is honest. There are moments when honest is the only prudence left. A sigh moved through the room, part relief, part surprise. It sounded like a window opening. Vittoria smiled then, and it was a real thing at last, edged and weary, and not made for display. "If you will do this," she said, "do it without apology. I have no appetite for half measures." Alessandro bowed to her with respect he had not owed her, and owed her nevertheless. "Thank you," he said simply. She nodded once, queen in a room that would not call her that. Prince Carlo took 2 brave steps, and then a third. He stood as if his knees might tremble and dared them not to. "I wish you happiness," he said to Lucia, a boy offering a blessing he had not been taught to give. She bent her head to him. "Learn quickly," she said. "You will be a man before the city learns your face. Do not let them teach you to speak like furniture." He blinked and looked at Sister Caterina, who took the compliment on behalf of the gender. The marriage was not made in a rush, but it was not delayed. The court had been starved for a ceremony that meant something. The chapel's stones knew how to receive vows. They did not judge the hands that made them. They had heard men swear on ambition, and women swear on fear. They were ready to hear a duke and a maid swear on breath and courage, and a memory that was coming back to life under their feet. Sister Caterina arranged Lucia's simple gown with practical tenderness. "You will not trip," she said, fussing at a hem. "You will not weep too much. You will remember to breathe." "I breathe when I am ordered to," Lucia answered, and then laughed, which ruined the dignity of the advice in the best possible way. Old Matteo stood by the door and swiped at his eyes with the back of his hand so that the salt would not stain his cap. Tommaso's hair was slicked down with water and bad judgment. He winked at Lucia and then looked at the floor, as if he had been caught stealing virtues he did not deserve. The Duke waited near the altar, with the patience of a man who has already chosen once and is merely walking the distance to say it in the right place. He did not wear velvet. He wore honor. It looked better on him. The chaplain began with Latin and ended with words all could understand. Lucia's voice did not tremble when she spoke her yes. She had said the word before. It had never meant this. Alessandro's voice was steady and quiet. He did not promise in the style of men who like to be heard. He promised like a man who expects to be held to it. When he lifted her hand to kiss the knuckles, he did it with the care of a person lifting a relic and the ease of a man greeting a friend at his own door. He slipped a ring on her finger, plain and shining. She slid his glove back over his hand afterward, and the room laughed softly because the small inversion blessed all the larger ones. Afterward the court ate and talked and pretended not to look. Some of the looks were fond, some were calculating. Gossip tried to sprout and failed for lack of water. Everyone had seen too much truth to feed on scraps. They stepped out to the terrace because the air indoors was full of congratulations and the air outdoors was full of sky. Frost held the balustrade in a light grip. The city lay like a patient creature. Lucia leaned her elbows on the cold stone and did not flinch because she had run through heat and would not be lectured by weather. "How you look like a duchess who does not know it yet," Alessandra said, coming to stand beside her, not touching until she turned enough to make room. "I look like a laundress with a ring," she said. "It may amount to the same thing." He laughed, the kind of laugh that belongs only to people who have set down a burden they have carried too long. "I remember more today," he said. "Not everything. Enough. I remember the smell of stone at Santa Consolata. I remember my father placing this very coin in my palm and telling me not to forget what a promise weighs. He did not tell me I would be the one to be carried back to the place where it began to pay it." Lucia touched the medallion at her throat. She did it openly, without flinching or tucking it away. "I remember a boy who looked at me as if I were a page in a book he had lost and suddenly found," she said. "He looked as if reading would be the same as breathing." "He was a solemn boy," Alessandro said. "He thought worthiness could be earned by good posture. He learned otherwise last night." "Last night," she repeated, and let the 2 words carry everything they needed. They did not need to speak more. Silence did the honest work. It polished the moment and returned it to them warmer. When they came back inside, the hall was full without being crowded. People made space for them. It was not deference alone. It was the relief of people who had seen a story end the right way in front of their eyes. It made them kinder for an hour. It might make them courageous for a day. Rinaldi stood with a glass he had not yet sipped. He approached Lucia as if approaching a dog that belonged to someone he respected and wanted to be liked by on his own merits. "Your Grace," he said to her, the title new in his mouth and not unpleasant. "I have known many tidy endings. They never last. I prefer today's kind. It is messy. It will make us live better." She inclined her head. "Keep your ledgers," she said. "Just make room in the margin for what does not fit." He almost smiled, and then caught himself out of habit. "I will try," he said, which for him was a vow. Vittoria came, walking as if she had been born with marble under her feet. She looked at Lucia and let 3 beats pass, so the words would not fly out untrained. "You have more spine than most women I am asked to respect," she said. "I will not pretend I like it. I do not insult women I like, I congratulate them." Lucia accepted the odd blessing because refusing it would have been proud, and accepting it required no vanity. "Teach your girls to be more than polite," she said. "We will need them." Vittoria's eyes warmed a fraction. "I will teach them to be dangerous," she said briskly. "Properly." Old Matteo bowed from too far away to be useful and close enough to be seen. Tommaso stole a sugared plum and put it on Lucia's plate, as if it were a medal. Sister Caterina sat down on a chair, because the day had been longer than her legs, and allowed herself to be served. Not every corner softened. The steward was led away, pale and stiff. He would answer to law. He would live to regret his obedience to a bad idea. The city would murmur. It would also come to the market and buy bread, and learn to say the word Duchess and mean it when they said Lucia. The first night in rooms that were now hers, Lucia did not sleep because she was not ready to stop watching. The chamber was not grand in the way ballads like to brag about. It was kind in the way homes must be. A small hearth, a chair that knew how to receive a body at ease, a bed that did not hang with curtains heavy enough to suffocate. She moved from window to table to chair, not to admire, but to acquaint. She had lived her life being careful of rooms. She would not begin by conquering one. Alessandro knocked before entering, even though old habits and new vows did not require it. It pleased her that he did. It said he did not mistake a promise for permission to forget manners. He came in and closed the door and leaned against it for a heartbeat, as if listening for a tune he was trying to learn. "I am yours," he said, simple as bread. "And I am yours," she answered. She reached her hand across the small distance between them, and he took it. That was all the room needed to know. He asked if he might remove her bandages. She held them out. He unwound the linen with care a physician would have been proud of. He pressed a kiss to the inside of each wrist, where the skin was new and shy. She felt nothing untoward in it, only the clean heat of reverence. They stood close and spoke very little for a long time. Words would have bruised what silence was doing perfectly well. Later, when the candles burned to soft hums and the hearth learned their names, he remembered something else. He pressed his thumb to the medallion and followed the curl of its mark with a finger. "This used to cut me when I slept," he said softly, smiling at his younger foolishness. "I would wake and hate it and then keep it anyway." "It cut me too," she said. "It was the only sharp thing I was allowed to own. It kept me from forgetting that gentle does not mean weak." He looked at her then with an expression that would have been too much to bear if she had been any younger. It was gratitude and desire and awe, all braided and tamed. He did not touch her mouth without asking. He asked. She answered with her breath, and then with her mouth. It was not a court's kiss, it was the first act of a life deliberately shared. Morning again. It came faster now. That is what happy days do. They arrive greedy. The city woke and did not burn. The gates opened and closed. Men argued about bread and not about scandal. In the market, women discussed Lucia's plain dress with approval that surprised them. Children ran with sticks that pretended to be swords. An old nun at Santa Consolata smiled to herself and did not tell anyone why. In the weeks that followed, Alessandro stood with Lucia at meetings that had never seen a maid's eyes before. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, men stopped pretending to write notes and listened. She asked questions that turned procedures into people, and numbers into names. Rinaldi learned to bring a separate ledger for her suggestions, and did not call it that, but kept it near the top of the pile. Vittoria invited Lucia to tea, and discovered that instruction can flow in both directions without either woman drowning. Prince Carlo visited the infirmary without pretense and carried trays. Sister Caterina let him, because mercy is a craft, and a prince ought to learn one. Lucia visited Santa Consolata. She did not travel with a clatter of horses. She went in a small carriage with a driver who knew not to speak unless asked. The sisters saw her and saw through her new sleeves. They touched her face. They laughed the way older women laugh when they recognize one of their own making a world kinder, without permission. The Mother Superior brought out a small ledger, with entries in a hand Lucia recognized now as the late Duke's, and she cried in the chapel where she had never allowed herself to before, tears for the child who had waited and the woman who had arrived. On a clear afternoon, Alessandra led Lucia to the door with the lion once more. They opened it without keys because the hinge had learned their names and decided to behave. They sat in the study and wrote 2 letters. One to the city about the inquiry's conclusion, one to the convent with a gift for any girl whose life had begun in flames and would go on in light. They sealed them with the ducal crest and with their medallion's mark. It was a new seal they shared, unseen by the court and all-powerful to the 2 of them. They walked the garden in winter and in the first thaw. They stood under trees that would later remember they had not been alone. They learned small things that marry 2 lives, the way she took tea, the time his patience shortened, the manner in which sorrow approached him, the angle at which joy surprised her. They fought twice and ended both quarrels laughing, because each had learned to surrender the right peace at the right time, and neither wanted to win more than they wanted to go on together. One evening, in the great hall where echo had once carried fear and now carried music, they danced, not with the grace of people who learned from teachers, but with the ease of 2 who had learned each other. He led without pride. She followed without erasing herself. The court watched and forgot to whisper. People love to be reminded that happiness can be ordinary and still be grand. Toward the end of the night, Alessandro raised a glass not for wine but for words. He spoke without paper. He said a simple thing. Names burn, titles blur. We learn them again every day or let them go. What remains is the courage that moved a maid into fire and a man out of it. We will forget many things. We will not forget that. Lucia stood at his side, ring bright, medallion warm against her skin, hands healed. She looked at the faces that had once weighed her like cloth and now weighed her like a person. She felt the old shame loosen and slip away the way a bad knot does when pulled the right way. She took Alessandra's hand because it was there. She held it because she liked to. That was the whole art. Later still, much later, on the terrace where they had learned to say tomorrow as if it were a place, they watched the city do what cities do best. Live. The wind lifted a curl at Lucia's temple. Alessandra tucked it behind her ear with the reverence of a prayer. They stood without speaking. Some endings do not need a word to hold them together. The air knew, the stone knew, the moon knew. And in that old house that had learned to be new for them, every hinge and every door and every corridor agreed. Thank you so much for listening to this story, all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.